less awkward.
You should
But
always do your recordings like this, mid-flow of the preamble.
you know what? Usually I do to people, we have a great discussion that probably could have been the whole video, and then I
Yeah,
record, and then we say it all again.
yeah. I
But
did that recently. I had a call with someone, and they were like, "Oh, I need you to come on the podcast, and we need to talk about what we've just spoken about." I'm like, "Oh, shucks, if only we'd recorded what we'd just
isn't it
spoken."
the truth? Honestly, I love everything that Dr. Adam Harrison does on social media and the advocacy work. So we're going to jump in and hear more about what he's doing. So briefly, Dr. Harrison here is an international coach. He's also a workshop leader. He's going to tell you a little bit more about what he does, but he has a background as a physician and a lawyer. And I can't say enough about what he does. So, Adam, please share what you do and who you are.
Oh well, that you may regret that invitation, because I can say a lot about what I do. That's not a problem for me. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Gillian. And yeah, just sometimes you meet kindred spirits in life, and just kind of instantly in alignment, and that's how I feel about your good self. So thank you. I'm very grateful. I appreciate you. Yeah, what do I do? So yeah, started life as a physician. Did surgery first, and then went into family medicine, and was always interested in medical law and the kind of the overlap between medicine and law, and not just kind of medical legal practice and clinical negligence and that kind of stuff, but also regulation of doctors, and how the medical boards, and over here the General Medical Council, kind of police things and discipline doctors, and the fairness of these processes
Yeah,
was particularly, yeah, the,
fairness.
or unfairness, yeah,
Yeah,
but these
yeah.
really kind of stimulated my interest intellectually. So I then went on to study law, because it wasn't enough just to kind of work for this organization that I was doing. So I passed the bar, and I'm a qualified barrister over here. So essentially, an attorney at law that can go into courtrooms and do advocacy. Because I think in the States all attorneys can do that, but in the UK it's a kind of a two-tier system. So I like the advocacy stuff, the being on your feet, and defending someone. So yeah, so that's why I did that, and actually that kind of coincided with my wife going back to work after maternity leave, as a maxillofacial surgery trainee. She's now an attending, because we have an almost 10-year-old, first double digit child, and she's kind of scary. But she turned one, and it was like, okay, my wife's going back to work, you're going back to work, and I've just kind of been past the bar, and looking at what to do with that side of my life now. But it wasn't going to work. I decided that my wife was the one who was on the established training pathway. She was not far off finishing her residency and so on, and I was at the very, very beginning, like basically going in at like intern level, and would have been doing lots of hours for very little pay. And then who's going to look after our little one, and we never wanted to be the kind of parents that didn't kind of raise their own kids, kind of like getting au pairs and nannies and stuff involved. So I was like, you know what, I've got these two qualifications, this medical and this legal stuff, and I'll figure it out. Everything is figure outable. So I just put myself forward to local organizations, to do advocacy for their doctors, to represent their doctors, to do advisory and consultancy work. And then this kind of led on to me being co-opted onto committees, and then I was voted onto a board of directors for an organization, became an assistant medical director for the NHS locally to me, became the medical director of an urgent treatment centre. And so I became an accidental leader, really. And very, very steep learning curve. But loved it. And while I was in one of those roles, was offered some leadership coaching, which, for me was just a complete like epiphany, really. I was how old was I? 43 going on. Yeah, I was just about to turn 43. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever been asked to, you know, talk about my values. I was like, oh my goodness, what's this all about? This
Yeah.
is interesting, you know.
Yep.
Um, you get to that stage in your life, where your moral compass internally has been guiding you, moving you towards things that you are in alignment with, and repelling you from things that you find are not in line with your integrity. And but then to actually put words to this moral compass was just really transformative for me. And one of my core values is justice. And just that for me explains so much.
Yeah, this is
um,
incredible because a lot of times, and there's going to be people that maybe haven't had experience with coaching, might be a little bit skeptical of coaching. And what I'm hearing, so many great things, and it all makes sense as to what you do. I'm hearing someone that's gone through a lot of transitions and take leadership of their life without even having that awareness, but following that internal compass. And what I did, and so many people do, is we actually ignore that internal compass, or we haven't really spent time actually being in tune with ourselves because we have
mhm.
all these messages that sound like ourselves but maybe aren't. So what you did was already have the awareness that you were following your moral compass and ignoring the rest. But I would say that's above and beyond what many of us can do.
I wouldn't give it too much kudos. It was all completely accidental. There was never any intentionality behind that. And that's why when I discovered what my values were at that time, it was like the biggest penny dropped. It was like this penny dropped and it clanged. I was like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. For a lot of you know experiences I'd had, and the way I'd behaved. I was on the receiving end of a lot of workplace bullying as both a surgical trainee and a family medicine and a newly qualified family physician. And but a lot of that was, me kind of calling out injustices or perceived injustices and unfairness and inequities, and maybe in my colleagues, my female colleagues being discriminated against, or my IMG colleagues or whatever, and people who didn't feel empowered to be able to speak up for themselves. Obviously a little bit presumptuous on my part, but I would just see this injustice happening and feel like compelled to step in, like my body was overtaken and I had to say something. But I put a target on my back, and then I was the target, and the victim of a lot of workplace bullying. But it's just me through and through, and it just made sense then after the coaching and the values work, that that's why I've behaved how I've behaved and done what I've done. And if I had to go back and do it again, I would do it exactly the same way. So yeah, so coaching, leadership coaching, helping people with their mindset, helping people through transition periods. I burnt out a couple of times myself, and I like to help people kind of recover from that and become transition through that, that darkness, and come out and start to thrive, with careers. You've said it. I've changed careers, I've experimented and dabbled and done all sorts of things. And sometimes it's been right place, right time. Sometimes I've made these opportunities, but I love seeing people go from a situation at work where they're not satisfied, and kind of like then work through things with them, and then see them starting to thrive, with leaders, with with wannabe leaders, or with established leaders who want to be ascend the levels and be promoted again. I love helping them kind of work through the mindset changes that they need to kind of to be able to achieve that, you know. So yeah, all of that. I love working with organization. I love the one-to-one stuff, but I love working with a room of people, training them, putting on workshops, being really interactive, you know, hearing what they've got to say, and helping organizations by working with groups of people. I do a fair bit of speaking, as I have no problem speaking, as you can tell, and I do some
Yeah.
keynote speeches. And
I wanted to point out something though with what you do, because some problems with coaching, right, is that we are people leaning in coaching is then we can gaslight ourselves. We think we're the problem. And then some people will say, well, the system's the problem. So I don't want to coach because then like they've accepted that our healthcare system is screwed up. And so why would I want to coach myself? But there's so much value in doing the inner work and also the systemic work. And you're such a great example of how we can advocate for the changes both at a system level and an individual level. But going off of an individual who might feel that way, where why would I go into coaching when it's a system problem? Can you share some things that I know there's some core things that usually come up for people that are really life changing when it comes to coaching, like skills we may not have developed? Can you share about some examples of what you've noticed in your one on one coaching about core themes that might come up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, oftentimes it's our own reaction to a situation that we can't control, for example. So if there's, you know, someone is saying, well, why should I change myself, why should I work on myself, it's the system that needs to change. Okay, we know this, we all know this, but who has the magic wand to change the system?
We all do if we collectively gather together and be the
We
change
do.
in the system. But you're
But
right.
how often have you tried to gather together a group of physicians? It's like herding cats, my friend. It's there are some movements coming along. I'll give you that, but physicians are often quite, you know, quite strong-willed and quite strongly opinionated people. And my experience of physicians, certainly in leadership, both as someone who has been working under physician leaders and someone who works with the leaders themselves now, is that some of them, you know, are lacking in certain key skills like emotional intelligence, and, you know, working with their values and being open to, you know, kindness as a solution, and not seeing it as a soft skill that is all just a bit, you know, foo-foo, and why, you know, why should we bother, we just have a job to get on with and we need to get on with it. So, you know, I'm with you, and I like to retain a level of optimism, but equally it's like with the workplace bullying work that I do. We're never going to change. I mean, almost every organization has a level of toxicity attached to it. You know, it's somewhere on the toxic spectrum. We're not going to change these things within a generation. You know, we need to show people what good leadership is, and encourage them to embrace it, and then they get into the organizations and they become the ripple and the change, and then people see them modeling that kind of good behavior, and it changes them, and slowly the organization changes. But we can't just rely on that to help people who are current victims of workplace bullying.
Yeah.
Like, we need to give them some skills to be able to deal with the day-to-day, you know, unpleasantness, while we're waiting for the systems to change. So it's like with anything, like with burnout, there is a huge amount of benefit into being introspective and reflecting on what we can do ourselves to cope with the awfulness of the system.
Yeah, and you
Um,
said some great things that I would love to dive deeper into, because I hear advocacy. You've got all these tremendous skills that can advocate at all levels, from a medical standpoint, from a justice standpoint, not just from your training in law, but from your moral compass of justice matters, that fierceness that you have. And you're such a strong advocate for people who are underrepresented and oppressed, which I know personally becomes the target. You became the target, and that's how people quiet us for trying to change something that's quite toxic and oppressive. Can you share about your passion for helping people that are in oppressed situations and underrepresented situations?
yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it started probably when I was a junior doctor, and working with IMGs who had just come over to the UK, and they were called like clinical observers or something like that. Often, well, almost exclusively unpaid roles, and they were just kind of dismissed, at best dismissed, at worst kind of ridiculed, and that really upset me. But I was very junior and didn't feel empowered enough myself to be able to challenge that at the time. Um, but since then, I have worked with more and more, and my confidence has grown. And I think one of the biggest turning points for me was three or so years ago. I was living in Australia. My wife was doing a fellowship in Australia, and all of us, and our two daughters, we all went to Australia to live. And I was working for the local medical school, and I was tutoring um, female Indigenous mature medical students. So these were women who already had a degree, and they were called GEM students, graduate entry medical students, because that, I know that's the standard in the States, but it's usually in Australia and the UK, you go straight from high school to medical school. And so these were women who had had other careers, like teaching, and for example, they had children of their own, and they were showing up. They were working hard, in challenging circumstances. I mean, I remember one was a single mum of three kids trying to go through medical school, without much help. And working as hard as they could, going to the wards, complying with the requirements set by their supervising attendings, and they were being bullied by these people, by people who had a duty of care to look after them as their students. And they were being, just picked on. And oh, it's just, there was some very unpleasant stories. But as I was tutoring about six of them, and two of them kind of came to me and said, "Can we speak with you?" And they told me their stories. And obviously it upset me, but it also brought back memories of my experiences of being bullied in the workplace as well. And I was a qualified doctor then. I wasn't even a student like these women. And it kind of it was around the time that I qualified as a coach, and I just thought I need to, a bit like was it Uncle Ben and Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility, right? So with your coaching skills, you've got to use them for good, right? And so I'm really, really keen to help, as you say, underrepresented and oppressed people, disenfranchised people, people who feel disempowered, that they don't have a voice of their own, and that's female colleagues, people of color, people with other, what we call protected characteristics in the UK, people with disabilities, people of different sexualities and different genders, and so on. And I as you know, I'm a huge male ally, huge advocate for women. My podcast is about inspiring women leaders. And one of the people that has truly inspired me, I mean, I say in episode 1 of the show, but my mum and my wife, and my wife comes from she's British Pakistani, born in the UK to Pakistani immigrant family, and was never encouraged to pursue education. Was actively discouraged. Despite that, she knew what she was strong enough, thankfully, and resilient enough to do it. But there are, and she put herself through dental school and medical school, to become a maxillofacial surgeon, which is what you have to do here in the UK. But there are so many people who don't have the inner strength and presence of mind and resilience to be able to do that. And
Yeah.
so many wasted opportunities.
I'll say I did it because of that, right? Because if people don't know my background, that was the path I started on, was oral maxillofacial surgery in the military, because with our system and our culture being very oppressive towards women, it takes people being the example and the allies, right? The people that aren't contributing to the problems and that are seeing the problems as you are and saying, this is not okay. And to have an example, because it's great. It's amazing as I have female mentors who are changing that culture and changing the type of mentor that they're being for people, as you were saying, to be the example of what we want to create for our future generations. And the obstacles that we have are other individuals. It may even be women against women, or people who want to keep the way things are, the status quo. So we're constantly trying. I would say the more strength I obtained, the more, like you did, the more I became bullied and was told to quiet down. And for me, coming from a childhood where maybe I didn't have the skills to overcome that level of oppression, mine became, I quieted myself through a very severe eating disorder. And in order to then not have that happen, like all that inner work, when you're talking about coaching, but coaching therapy, and just really getting to the root of observing these issues that we have normalized in our culture, and then having examples of what's possible. So I love that you just shared that, because she's an example of what's possible, that says, I will not accept that status quo. This is not right. And let me lead the way. But I imagine for her, as it was for me, it's once we enter these non-gender stereotyped roles, it's a lot to overcome. And we have to believe in our core why even more strongly than maybe a route where we weren't having to overcome as many obstacles, but being grounded in our why, so that we can constantly be hurdling everything that comes up. And for me, why I left surgery was that I lost my why. And I didn't feel like my passion was strong enough to overcome the level of maltreatment I was experiencing. And then a lot of it was also self-induced self-doubt turning into self-sabotage.
Yeah. And she'd be the first to say that it's not all rosy in the garden. She has to work on this every single day. Every day there are adversities she's facing, I will say almost exclusively from her medical colleagues. She gets along really well with all of her colleagues. She's a great team player, and she's very patient-centered. Never any issues with patients or kind of nursing colleagues or secretarial colleagues or anything like that. The people that cause problems for physicians in the main, in my experience, as both someone who's worked in medical defense organizations, kind of like representing doctors who've been vexatiously and frivolously complained about to the medical board by their colleagues, and has been on the receiving end myself, and just seen from all the clients I've worked with, it's sadly almost exclusively other doctors that make life difficult for us doctors. But yeah, I mean, just kind of going back to that piece that you mentioned before about, why work on myself and my own development, if it's the system that needs to change. Just kind of something you said there has just reminded me to really, really concentrate on the things that we can control. Really, really focus on those, and like with Stephen Covey's circles of control and influence and remoteness, really make the things that we can control, that circle bigger, and just try to pay as little heed, as little give as little credence, and ignore the kind of the inner negative voices and the limiting beliefs of the things that we can't control. Yeah, we could spend ages focusing on how we can't control the system, but how's that going to help anyone?
Yeah, and I find that, so I changed when I was in an institution that I felt I was not being treated well. I changed institutions, and even though my institution treats me well, I still have that inner negative dialogue. So I learned that
Mm,
if I could do it all over again, and I joined coaching before, like in the in between. So it was
mm,
serendipitous, really, because I was at
mm,
kind of a life and death rock bottom, and I found I was out of desperation that I wanted to do something I hadn't tried yet. And I joined physician spaces talking about coaching, and there was a lot of skeptics. And then my own family was making fun of the idea of a life coach. And so I had to quietly enter the program and not say anything, because I mean, I was so ill. And it was on all levels, like physically,
mm,
mentally, psycho-spiritually. I had just
mm, mm.
constantly been grinding through our system and not pausing long enough to say, what agency do I have in this? What am I
Yeah,
missing? And I
yeah.
think the issues we develop, that coaching really helps, is when we are in the system so long that are toxic and that we know have
Mm,
issues, we develop a learned helplessness. And this can
yeah,
keep us in the toxic environments and also
yeah,
continue to weigh heavily on our well-being. And so
yeah.
when I developed self-compassion, which was a huge grounding force, I could see more clearly, like you do with the bullying, like this isn't right. And I could
Mm,
see
mm,
how I thought that's what I deserved because I had lost my sense of value and worth along the way. So I'm a huge advocate for coaching, of course, because of what I've noticed in my own life. And I credit it for,
mm,
along with all the other helping modalities I did, but I think
mm,
after I had done therapy, I think coaching gave me the tools I needed to take back ownership of my life,
mm,
versus therapy
mm,
was like, I know you have to be the one that buys into whatever you do. But for therapy, I kept hearing a diagnosis and I kept identifying with it. Like I am broken. I am the
mm,
problem.
mm,
Um, and I was medically discharged from the military, which was something I was really passionate about. And so I made that mean something more than it probably did about my
mm.
competencies and capabilities. And it was at a time where I had lost, like my ex-boyfriend had just passed away, and my co-resident passed away, and my commander passed away, and I
Ugh,
was dealing with suicidal ideation. So I didn't really stop to appreciate, like, wow, life is really hard right now. Just to have some self-compassion. At that time, I was completely
mm, mm,
doing the opposite, beating myself up and picking apart
mm,
all of my weaknesses and showing like the outcomes as a way to validate that I was unworthy. And so I think coaching can bring up these common themes we have in our own mindset,
mm,
in our own beliefs about
mm,
ourselves. And then you can get all the types of help that you need. Like coaching and therapy
mm,
together is something I'm a huge advocate for.
mm, mm, mm. So sorry to hear about all of those, terrible situations that seem to befall you all in a cluster. I mean, you know, the thing is, all of that was out with your control, wasn't it? There's just um, nothing you could do about that. But and sort of ironically, I suppose you concentrated on the things you could control, like your food intake and things like that.
Yeah, you're spot on.
Um,
And running, food intake,
yeah,
running myself to the
yeah,
ground. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Over
yeah. Um,
we do that too.
so
Overwork.
yeah, so that there are we have to be mindful of not over controlling the things we can control as well, I
Yeah.
suppose. Because especially and as doctors are very good at that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can do they can do everything well, right? So if I'm going to control something, I'm going to control it really well. Um But
I think that's the value of the coach, right? The value of the coach is somebody there to hear what you're saying and to call you out on your BS, or
yeah,
like, wait,
a-
or even to just express like, okay, I see you getting, because
absolutely.
we have blind spots, right?
Yeah,
And so one thing,
absolutely.
even as a coach, and
Yeah,
I'm sure you probably can relate to this, is like, as a coach, we're like, but I have all the tools inside of me. I am a coach. I should be able to coach myself
yeah,
out of this or into
yeah.
this. And then we're like, but we have blind spots, and
We do.
that's not
We do.
the role of being. You
Yeah,
don't, just like
yeah,
we're not our own physician, we're not our own
yeah.
dentist, we're not our own coach. Like,
No,
it's
we
just,
have blind. Yeah, we have blind spot, and we have biases. That you absolutely need an objective accountability partner to kind of take over. Yeah, I mean, there's gosh, there's so much kind of rich stuff coming up here. I mean, you talked about agency and kind of having that agency, and this is one of the things that when I work with these disenfranchised groups of mainly doctors, and they're mainly IMGs in these workshops that I run. They're called SAS doctors, SAS doctors, which stands for specialty and associate specialist doctors. It's a grade of doctor in the UK where they've done a residency, but they very clearly chose that they didn't want to go down the attending pathway. They didn't want to be doing all of those on calls and having a huge amount of responsibility and having to get involved in administrative things and so on. But they are independent practitioners in their own right. But the problem is, because they are not attendings, they're not seen as a group of doctors that is worth supporting, it's worth investing in, it's worth giving leadership opportunities to. And when I work with these groups, I very, very clearly hear them say, when we ask for things, when we make suggestions, we are just ignored, or we are silenced. And so I really I love helping them start to regain the personal sense of agency, but also to equip them with some skills like assertiveness, how to be more assertive, how to negotiate in situations, how to see conflict as not something that they should run a mile from. And I think there's the feedback I get, there's always that sense from IMG doctors that if they speak up, they're just going to be fired or whatever, and what are
but
they
is
going to
that
do
a real
then?
risk? Is it a real risk? Because what I
I,
fear is that sometimes retaliation, being fired, is a real risk, right?
mm, yeah, well, I mean, of course it is, but the employer would be massively, given the huge shortage of doctors that we have in the UK
Yeah,
and in other countries, they really would be shooting themselves in the foot.
yeah,
And also that they have recourse to unfair dismissal procedures, legal options. They can go to the regulator as well, the medical board, and say this has happened, so but yeah, but it's a narrative that they very much get trapped in, that they've been trapped in since they came over for the first time and were these clinical observers that I was telling you about, where they were kind of put down and
yeah,
shunned and ignored. And they some of them do stay trapped in that kind of mindset. But to learn how to conflict healthily is so good, and for their agency,
yeah.
they come away and they say, oh, that was what was one of the most useful parts of the workshop.
And
you
it's
know
how you feel too, right? It's because what they're taught and what we're taught in training, when we're not treated, we're underpaid and we're undervalued, is like,
mm,
for me, that had this kind of baseline belief that I was unworthy from like a younger age, then
mm,
those circumstances like they really accentuated that belief in my head. Like,
mm,
I'm unworthy, I'm not valuable, I don't deserve to be here. So even if there was like 90% of people saying the opposite to me, I'd gravitate towards the 10% of environments where that was true, where I felt
mm.
like I was being oppressed and like people were showing me that I wasn't worthy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and that's where that mind game plays on you, because you could create examples. You could
mm,
demonstrate like, oh,
mm,
see, when this happened, I clearly am worthless bliss. So
Yeah.
when it comes to like when we're going to advocate for ourselves, we have to believe we're worthy of advocating. So that first line is, I am worthy of standing up for myself. I am
Mm,
fiercely self. So there's in Kristen Neff's book, Fierce Self-Compassion, she
mm,
talks about
mm,
tender self-compassion, which is nurturing.
mm,
That
mm,
fierce self-compassion, which is what I'm picturing when you say, I stood up for myself, I advocate for myself, I will no longer tolerate this.
mm.
And if we're in a background, if we're from a circumstance where we were abused physically or
Yeah.
emotionally, we might feel like
Yeah.
it's safe to not advocate for ourselves. So then
Yeah.
that was true for me. So I had to say, how can I
Yeah.
create a safe plan for me to then advocate for myself? Because being quiet is no longer an option.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's an awful lot of learned helplessness among physicians, and are it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Are people with that kind of background attracted to medicine, or do they become like that? Through you know the arguably Victorian style process of medical education in some places. And certainly what I hear from my IMG colleagues is that, they still, in India, for example, should we use as an example, there's utter deference and respect to their people who are more senior to them.
Yeah.
So they come over here with that mindset, and so they will literally just do everything that anyone tells them to do
Yep.
without questioning it.
Mhm.
And for going back to my podcast, I've had lots of my guests have talked about the challenges they faced as female. Most of them are physicians. I do have some non-physician guests, but and there's again just what they're used to through society. They're used to misogyny, but then it can become sexual discrimination, and sexual harassment and things like that. And that's where it's so sad to hear. Honestly, look at me. I'm this white male with the privilege that entails. And I thought I knew from my wife's stories, as a woman of color in the medical system, um, most, if not all, of the things that can befall our female colleagues. I had no idea about the sort of the extreme sexual harassment side of things. So this is again, looking back at things that we can control, I guess, and working on our agency.
Yeah. And I think that community, so one thing is awesome to hear too, because people will say, and something that comes up is like, why is a white male leading this podcast? But it's needed. It's needed that people are learning the reality of what we face, right? So for
Mm,
both the people who are going through it, but also the people who are around the other people who are contributing to the problem, the
mm.
allies, and having a community where we hear these discussions. And it's huge that you are willing to learn. Like this whole podcast is you learning, as you just captured.
It
Like I
really
did
is.
not even know that this
Yeah,
happened. And how can you then open the eyes of other people who have no
yeah,
idea that's going on? Because we know
yeah,
what's going on. We
yeah.
have it, but we are quieted either from our own internal guilt and shame, feeling like
Mm,
we were the problem, we were the weak one, and I don't dare share what happened to me for fear of
mm,
retaliation, because we're smaller individuals usually based on genetic different musculature and height and whatnot.
mm.
So for me, like in times of my life where I hid in guilt and shame, it's because you don't want to admit that. And then we hear the stories about people in our system going to HR, and then HR isn't a safe place to report big problems often.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so then like what's the real solution here? And I think having awareness and the community that you're building, just for anyone who has maybe missed the title that you mentioned earlier, can you share again your podcast title and where they can find it?
Yeah, it's called Inspiring Women Leaders, and it's on the Health Podcast Network. Um, but yeah, no, it's fantastic what you're saying. I um the show has kind of evolved in ways I could never imagine, and I'm sure as someone who has her own show, maybe this is not how you planned it. You know, this is it's turning out to be its own thing. It has its own personality, and you know, that's wonderful. And I'm always learning from my guests. And I did an interview this morning, and you know, was blown away by most of what my guest said, but a couple of things really stuck with me, and I'm like, yes, they are the sound bites for the promotion. You know, they are just mind-blowing, you know. So yeah, there's so much obviously about the challenges and how to navigate the challenges of being a female leader and your journey, your leadership journey, but also just these women have so much wisdom, and you know, you say, where did the idea come from? Why am I doing a podcast for women? You know, but the people who have inspired me in my life have overwhelmingly been women. When I originally, it was never going to be a podcast. I had this idea when we moved to Australia that I wanted to put on a conference. You know, just maybe it was a one-off at first, maybe it's going to be an annual thing, who knows, but it was going to be a day where you know, I'd reflected, and I'd kind of written a list of the leaders that I'd worked with in my career, and which ones were good or great, and they were all women, and the men were, you know, mostly mediocre at best.
Men, we do love men. We do love men.
Yeah,
but
I love men. I love myself, right? I love
yes,
myself,
but I
Gillian.
will say, right? Okay, so there's a lot of times in my life where I wish I would have just not had to overcome the things I did that made me hate myself, and I feel like I wasted so many years of my life hating myself. And what I have learned and what I have grasped now is that it's how rich my life is through leaning into the pain that those caused me in a way that not having gone through them would never have given me the opportunity to do. So I can sit with people who are feeling like their life isn't worth living. I can sit with people who are oppressed, and the circumstances that you face both in your life as being who you are, but then being as an advocate, it gives you this greater depth of appreciation. So then that fierceness you had at baseline could come out in a way that not having these insights. And I love how you share, like, loving the people who you see this happening to. We see it time and time again with parents who are advocating for what their children are going through. Like, it's just developed this fierce passion, and I think we bring that into what we're doing. And that's when you said, I love how you said that it kind of takes out a personality of its own, like, and allowing it to do that, and creating that community. So one thing, we have a mutual friend, Dr. Dawn Sears, and she creates this community like you are with your podcast. Hearing your story be said by somebody else immediately can help open you to be more vulnerable and start releasing that guilt and shame of thinking, what did I do wrong? Why am I so weak? And what's wrong with me? So I love it. And the podcast, since you can listen to it when it's the right time for you to listen to it.
Well, that's it. It's an evergreen product, you know. It's for me, it's a you know, maybe it's a little bit aspirational. I don't know how long it's going to be in existence, but it's a bit of a legacy. My wife and I have 2 children, and they're both girls, and you know, so this is a you know, a gratitude to the women who have helped forge me, and you know, a celebration of the women who come on my show, but also something, you know, for the future for my daughters to kind of see and look back on, and learn from. But yeah, I mean, as I say, I then began to question why do a conference. And at that time I started listening to Dr. Una's podcast. It was the first podcast I was listening to, first podcast I ever kind of became aware of. We were in Australia. My wife was working a lot. I was not working at that time, and yeah, podcasts were my salvation. And Dr. Una, you know, made me, and I hadn't met her at that stage, made me through the medium of her podcast realize that I too could be a podcaster, you know. that little old me, just a physician, could do these other things as well,
Just a physician, yeah.
yeah,
How
just a
many times
physician.
you hear that so much, and I'll share Dr. Una's and your podcast in the show notes because she likes to say we are the Calvary, like leading the Calvary to
Yeah,
make the changes, and we have so much that I'm sure I'll invite you on a million times because especially as you evolve and you learn things, there's so many things, and I want to be mindful of your time and also make sure that we get the audience a few takeaways from today's discussion.
there are some kind of like key tenets that I have over the last couple of years reflected on, and I do a lot of work as the systemic antidote, should we say, to workplace bullying, around kind leadership, and detoxifying cultures, and making them kinder cultures. And so, and I do keynotes on the benefits of kindness in the healthcare workplace, and the health benefits as well as the benefits to the employer as well, but to the individual employees. And I love this quote by Rabbi Harold Kushner, who's based in New York, I believe, who's quoted as saying, "Do things for people not because of who they are or what they can do for you in return, but because of who you are." And that's really, that kind of completely selfless, not expecting anything in return. In fact, I must take this opportunity to reference my guest that I interviewed this morning, who is a clinical pharmacist and clinical director, and now partner in a family physician clinic in the UK. Her name's Yuan To, and she's a Malaysian, now British woman. And she said she has this huge love of nature, and she'll go to parks. I'm laughing because she made me laugh when she was saying this. She was laughing herself. That she hugs trees. She'll
I
openly
love it.
hug trees. Yeah.
Love it.
And she said dog walkers will walk past her and kind of like laugh and what are you doing and whatever. And she's like, you know what, this tree has provided shade when it's been hot for people. It's provided cover when it's been raining. It's provided a habitat for insects and birds. It's provided food, in its seeds and so on. And it has never asked for anything in return.
Wow.
I know. That's got to be one of my sermons. I'm like,
Yeah, it's
that
so
is
the tree keeps coming up. That's amazing. The tree keeps coming up too because one, being around nature, right? How often you've got a nice background behind you, but I moved to a city and
well, I've
immediately I
been
was,
there. That's my photo.
oh, beautiful. But nature has healing properties of its own. And in our hustle
Yeah.
and bustle of the way that our society has become, we're often neglecting the key components of what keep a human healthy. It's being
Yeah.
with nature and really grounding
Yeah.
yourself. And when I
Yeah.
was having a really challenging time at work, one of our colleagues, Dr. Jessie Mahoney, told me you should just be a tree because she does yoga. So there's the tree pose and stand grounded
Yeah.
and tall. And then right
Yeah.
after that, my coach was Dr. Sarah Seidelman, who also told me about the tree and just like really to channel the tree. And I love trees. I always say I want to go
Yeah.
live in a forest
Yeah. Yeah.
away from humanity for a while. But there's so many. I'd
Well,
love to hear people's tree stories because I'm sure there's a lot of them. So please
I'm
make sure to share.
I'm just gonna have to just extend that a little bit and say, as soon as I heard that, I said to her, we have lived in this house for over 20 years, apart from when we were overseas for 2 years. And there is a tree in our garden that was my height when we moved in. And now it's double or 2.5 times my height. And we've seen it grow beautifully over these years. And it's summer. Well, apparently it's summer over here. It's raining all the time, but anyway. And so it's all lush. It's full of leaves. They're all green before the fall comes. And I said, I really appreciate that tree, but I've never let the tree know that I appreciate it. It's beautiful. And I said, as soon as we finish this interview, I'm going to go into my garden. I'm going to hug the tree and tell it how much I appreciate it. And I did. And it felt lovely. it
Oh,
felt really wonderful.
that's
So
awesome.
I'm quite happy to be like Prince Charles, or now King Charles, and call myself a tree hugger, or speaking to plants or something. There's a lot to be said for that, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a kindness piece anyway. Values, I've obviously mentioned values before. Values, so important to me now. Live, love, and lead by your values, and do work in alignment with your values. I'm in that fortunate position now where I'm not constrained by an organization. I work for myself, and so I have that really empowering and liberating ability to turn down work from people or organizations or clients that I just don't feel in alignment with. And it means I earn less money, but I feel
Yeah,
better
this is
about it.
huge, though. I'd like to highlight this because in physician sectors, this is where I see it a lot because maybe that's the spaces we're in, but there's a lot of scarcity mindset. So
Mm,
scarcity, and people often will take, if you're working first as an entrepreneur, we know it's a challenging road. So we might want to
mm,
like grab, oh my gosh, somebody wants to pay me, right? It's like,
mm,
but if
mm,
you start living out of your integrity, you will know. You will feel
mm,
horrible. You will know. And it's not sustainable. You want to live within your integrity, live within your core values, and
mm,
believe with that growth mindset that in doing that, you will find the people who align, you
mm,
will find the
mhm,
work that aligns, and you will stay
mm.
well. Because when we
Yeah,
get anxious and have scarcity mindset, that is high risk. That's when you need a coach to help get you through that,
yeah,
or
yeah.
colleague or whoever can help you really challenge those beliefs. Because Martha Beck was that's the program I did, Martha Beck
Mm,
Wayfinder Life Coaching. She's got a book called
mm,
The Way of Integrity, and you exemplify this so well. You ground yourself in what matters, and you've lived a life where you're constantly, if you're feeling out of alignment, you're aware. And everything that you're posting right now aligns with what you say your core values and your missions are. So if you were to have asked me what they were before we talked, it's
mm.
exactly what you've shared here. And that is the congruency that we need in our lives so that we can stay well and stay on the path even when it feels
Yeah.
hard.
Thank you. Thank you. I just have to say a little bit about scarcity mindset. I've done a fair bit of. I have a spiritual coach, and we're doing some inner child work, and I come from a very, very modest, very humble background. The years where my parents were in and out of work, made redundant by their employer. The house was kind of like on the verge of being repossessed by the bank and by the mortgage company and things like that. There was a lot of poverty, to be fair. And that really, I think, has manifested as when I first started working for myself, with a very strong scarcity mindset. And I'm sure you've heard of Stacey Bayman,
Yeah.
the coach's coach. And I like her work. I'm mostly fairly indifferent about her work, but one thing that I love that she says is she uses this word graspy.
Yeah.
Graspy, such a brilliant word, like evocative, visceral. You know exactly what she's when
Yeah. I want
it's
to
like a
be,
feeling. It's like
we
yeah,
get it all the
yeah,
time. It's predatory, is what it is. Grasping
yeah,
comes across as desperate and
yeah.
predatory, and we
It's
feel the
utter yeah, utter desperation for I've got to I've got to land this client, you know, and yeah. So and I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've really turned that around into an abundance mindset these days. But yeah, absolutely, that's it's not something I think it's not something that is so prevalent in physicians in the UK, because their salary is not necessarily dependent on the number of patients coming through the door, specifically, or what the insurers are going to pay you, or whatever. It doesn't kind of work like that so much. But it's certainly, from my background. I think that's where it comes from. Just moving on, you mentioned Kristen Neff. I'm a big fan of Kristen's, and something else that I've learned is really to just be compassionate to yourself as well as others. I recently did a talk, a face-to-face talk to about 280 National Health Service HR managers, and I asked them to raise their hands if they felt comfortable, if they were regularly overly harsh to themselves. And honestly, almost all of them raised their hands. And those that didn't, I think, were just not wanting to, because the person next to them they knew maybe, and they didn't want to maybe admit that
That's
to a
why we
work
do
colleague.
this.
Yeah,
So anybody
yeah.
down below who's been overly harsh to themselves, or me,
Raise your hand.
yeah,
But I mean, I always say, when we are being like that to ourselves, is that how we would be to our best friend? Is that how we would speak to our best friend? And obviously the answer's no, is always no. So just start trying to treat yourself like how you would treat your best friend. Speak to yourself how you would speak to your best friend. And I've one more, which is, and this is something that's really been reinforced through my podcast as well, because the importance of mentorship and allyship cannot be underestimated. Especially, when you listen to the show, you hear my guests talk about it. Almost all of them in their take homes will say, get a mentor,
yeah,
and so for me, and I say as a sort of solopreneur, but I think it applies to everyone. I think it applies to physicians as well. Have a small group of trusted, confidant advisors to turn to, and also to be able to support in turn. I've recently had a few entrepreneurial hitches and challenges. So, you mentioned wonderful mutual friend, Dr. Dawn Sears, who's been one of my guests on my show. Fabulous guest, really incredible story. But I've recently had a chat with her, and she just set me right. She's set me back on, put me back on an even keel, and set me on a straight course again. She really helped me get out of my confusion, get out of my head. I was too much in my head. So we sometimes need people, maybe a coach, maybe a mentor, maybe an accountability support group, maybe a paid Facebook group, whatever it is. Have something.
yeah. I have all those,
Oh,
and I will
yeah.
say, I have all those, and that's important, right? To have all those,
Yeah.
because then I walk away from each one has a certain role in your life, and
Mm.
there's always the cliche saying, I'm not sure if the number is correct, but like you become like the 5 people that you
Yeah.
spend your time around,
Yeah.
and if your immediate family isn't supportive, right?
Mm.
And we're trying to please them because that's who we feel we're loyal to,
Mm.
that can be quite toxic if they don't,
Yeah.
if they maybe they've grown up in the same type of issues that you might be facing. And so giving ourselves permission to lean into groups and to separate from that and really take a step back and say, what do I really want? Like, what's at the core here? And I find
Mm.
it really hard when we start to lean out of things that we feel becomes disloyal to our culture. Like you were saying,
Mm.
sometimes when people move from other cultures and they are taught that they have to say yes. Well, it's hard for me, who didn't grow up necessarily with that culture, had a similar example from like an abuse situation where I had to say yes, but
Mm.
not ingrained from a cultural belief where you
Mm.
think, well, if I don't do this. So working with the people who might resonate and understand at that core level and start to create that boundary and also support you holistically. And then when it comes to, for me, when I was leaving surgery and I had all this guilt and shame, well, I met all these other people. Like, you've done a lot of different career transitions. Well, great. Like, we can place judgment on that, or we can say, wow, I grew a lot and now you have all these different skill sets that
Mm.
culminated into this amazing ability to advocate from a lot of different perspectives. And then also just like the people that are, for me, I find myself getting stuck in traditional paths. Like, my mind has a
Mm.
hard time abstract thinking. And to see people doing things outside the box, they show you what's possible. And and then also when you are facing these obstacles, it's a lot harder when you do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And we're taught not to ask questions. I don't know if you had the same thing training, like we're taught to know it
Mm.
before we learn it often.
Mm.
And depending on your mentor as a trainee, and that's not healthy. Like we
No,
have a growth mindset,
no.
accept that you're not going to know everything, and that saying you don't know it's not a weakness, but it's more of a liability if
Yeah.
you
Absolutely. Well, the
don't.
problem is that when you're in isolation, when you're in a silo, and we none of us don't know what we don't know. So you don't know whether you're kind of making mistakes or not if you're just relying on yourself, and then all you're doing is listening to your limiting beliefs. You haven't got a sense check. So yeah, definitely reach out, join groups, find a coach, do these things.
Which is a perfect segue to ask, how can they reach out to you?
They can look at my website that needs a little bit of updating, I think. But anyway, it's www.dradamharrison.com, dradamharrison.com, and contact me through that. They can email me, which is just dr.adamharrison, all one word, at gmail.com. I am fairly active on LinkedIn, as you know. I'm just Dr. Adam Harrison on LinkedIn. I'm on all the platforms, to be fair. I'll maybe just put it in the show notes or something.
Sure, I absolutely will do
But
that.
LinkedIn's my fave.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, we can have a lot of different discussions that are always enriching, and I really value supporting you and hearing all the things that you're doing on social media. It's bringing quite a kind presence and an idea of what can be possible, like what we're saying, and just really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for your time, and it's a real privilege. Honestly, I'm honored. Thank you.
And everyone, thank you for watching. Share your takeaways down below. And of course, we'll have ways to contact Adam in the show notes. So until next time.
Thank you.